All right. How you doing today?
Good, a bunch so.
Okay.
Very good.
All right. I'm not sure. I have so many people screaming at me on Twitter. I'm not even sure what we're talking about. So,
Yeah, okay. I guess I'll start. I'll just say the reason I got involved with you in any way on Twitter
hmm
is because I often see your tweets, and they're almost whenever they go into any the progressive to leftist area, it's usually quite antagonistic. And
yep.
I sort of took the bait. Is basically what happened there.
It's
But
not entirely
anyways,
bait. I mean most of what I say. I'm very curious if there's a particular tweet that I've said that you take issue with, or anything you want to go over. Like, yeah, we can do it.
oh, I can't even remember 3 days in the past. So
Okay.
I mean, that's kind of a joke, not entirely though.
Sure.
So earlier you were talking about Hassan and the co-op thing, and I thought that might be an interesting topic of conversation because I think you had talked about how owning a channel is owning capital, and I would say the business the the capital you actually own would be any business you have registered. The channel is if I'm not mistaken actually owned by YouTube, is it not?
Um, on a very technical level, yeah, it depends on what you mean by channel, and it depends on what you mean by ownership. I guess we would have to start getting into like when you say channel, do you mean like the intellectual property because that's owned by you, or do you mean the servers
Yeah,
that
that is
host it?
I mean like the
Yeah,
actual channel. Yeah.
like the web space is owned by YouTube. You own the intellectual property. The servers are probably ran by Google or Amazon or something. And
Yeah.
then yeah, but
I'm trying to
but
figure
yeah,
out where I should sit so that I'm not there. I'm not covered by the text. Anyways, yeah, I'm just in my opinion, like when we start talking about like what's morally required of somebody who's advocating for these types of things, I wonder what your opinion on people who, I mean, underlyingly speaking, pretty much everything is individualistically does come down to an individual's morals. But I don't necessarily think to myself like, hey, I think that I need to morally police people into socialism, and I kind of think that that's not productive. I think that it's not great to be talking about morals, and I guess if we're talking more about the material conditions of things, then we're kind of, in my opinion, then we start getting into a more interesting conversation.
I
And I
mean,
was thinking maybe we could start with that kind of a thing.
sure we can. It's it's we can do that. It's very frustrating for me to start a conversation when so much of my issue with left leaning people is that every analysis that they give of capitalism and then the comparisons
Mm-hmm.
that they make to an idealized socialized system usually start from a moral foundation. So it's a little frustrating that we have to leave those by the wayside because most conversations typically start with any sort of surplus value that you're scraping from a laborer is exploitative in a highly immoral fashion. And that's usually where the conversation starts. So it's like, well, now I just want to analyze, like, because usually this is my line. Usually I say, oh, well, economic systems are descriptive. These don't really, like, this person makes $2 an hour. Like, that's not in and of itself inherently evil. Like, that's just an economic analysis. Like, there is no morality
Well,
baked
yeah,
into
that's
it. But
an observation, more or
yeah,
less.
but yeah, I mean, we can. Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about, I guess, like the general ideas of co-ops or whatever, we can. Sure.
Well, I don't necessarily think that co-ops equal socialism. And I
hmm
watched your debate with Ben Burgess, and I felt like it really got talked about a lot on as if that is socialism. And I think that a lot of people, I mean, there's a lot of different forms of socialism. And if I were to sit here and tell you, like, I believe in X type of socialism or Y type of socialism, I'm not going to be able to go down the path and tell you that I have no objections anywhere along the line. And that, I think that's, we start to get into hypothetical stuff. And what I would maybe like to come from here is that I sort of come to socialism from a criticism like Marx. I come like the sort of, and forgive me, I'm not normally doing debates.
hmm
So if I structure this strangely, please forgive me. Um, I typically come from. I read Capital when you played a clip earlier of me kicking myself in the nuts. That is me.
Oh, okay. Oh, I
I
didn't
come
know. It
from
was in the background. I
comedy.
didn't even know. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I come from comedy. I don't come from like a severely academic background. But at the same time, I don't come to this from really a particularly moralistic
Okay.
um, background as well. I read Capital a few years ago, um, after something happened in 2011 where the media. I was fighting with a gossip blogger. The gossip blogger printed this story that was untrue about me, and the media actually picked that up, and that kind of defined my ability to interact online. So um, you'll probably see some of that in the chat. There are people who will bring that up and
Oh, that's
say,
fine. Yeah, I don't care.
but I sort of wondered to myself, why is there such a power difference between, what I say and what this media, Gawker specifically was who said it. Why do they have the kind of power that I don't? Like, I'm saying the thing that, like, it's equally as, like, it's equal as far as, like, how much evidence is presented. There was no evidence on my side. It was just my word. There was no evidence on the other side. It was a gossip blogger's word. And that kind of led me down this path to sort of questioning power structure, more so than just like capital, because I didn't come from a capitalist critical background in any way, shape, or form.
I'm super curious, just for the sake of memes, just to go
Yeah,
on
we
this
can go
one
through
thing.
all of that crap if you
Well,
want
no,
to,
I
as
don't. I
long
don't
as
need
you're
to.
neutral about
Yeah,
it.
no, I don't. I don't even care. I've been involved with so much drama myself with this, whatever. But like, let's say that this was our power. If Gawker would have been some socially owned cooperative, like it would still have all the same
Mhm.
power, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, but it's also invested more heavily in the status quo than anything else would be. Like, okay,
But
so
if the
let's say
status quo was
Gawker.
socialism, I mean, it would
Well,
be.
okay, so I guess the difference
What do
here
you think of
is,
the right
if it's
libertarian
a
meme that
socially
civil
owned
war is
cooperative,
coming?
then at every level of the decision making, potentially we could have a vote. Now, whether or not that means the outcome is different, I can't tell you, but it does provide a lot more opportunities for an actual democratic
But when you
outcome.
say every level of decision making has a vote, that's even in socialism. That's not true.
No, well, that's exactly why I said there's a lot of different forms of socialism, and if I'm just going to start here, then we end up talking about a lot of different things, and
Sure, but
I'm
like
perfectly
even in
comfortable talking about that.
just to be very clear, like there's no form of socialism that would have every employee voting on every
No,
single
no.
decision made by the business, right? That would just is not
Well, I mean,
feasible.
that depends. It really does depend. If you're going to talk about, say, a liquid democracy or a more, I actually shouldn't get that. Requires me to start defining terms that I didn't come prepared to talk about
Sure.
intensely. But I will say, let's say there were three more decisions, or two, or one, just more decisions democratically, then we're talking about a lot more people's interests. We're talking about a lot more power. The power is distributed in a way that is just absolutely not when Gawker is owned by capital, when it's owned by shareholders or run by a board, or et cetera, et cetera. Like, you have a few people voting, and they vote once, and they may not make every decision. You're 100% right. There's probably going to be delegated activities.
Sure, but
But
like,
let's say,
what, real quick into this. Okay, I'm sorry because I love you, but I get roasted so hard all the time for my takes on socialism. Okay, so this is all intensely interesting to me. So, first of all,
oh, I'm perfect. It's perfectly fine. Ask any question you want.
okay,
I may not have
yeah,
an answer,
sure.
but
So,
yeah.
firstly, so I have to ask: is your version of socialism a for-profit version or a non-for-profit version?
I'm a non-for-profit,
Okay,
but
so
I
you're
am
talking
also a
some sort of
libertarian socialist.
okay, so you're talking for some sort of planned market then, if you're not working for profit, like some sort of
Well, that I'm more of, if you want me to get really, really explicit, I'm more along the lines of an anarcho-communist. I wouldn't call myself that specifically, but I would say that I trend in that area.
okay, I just
I come from
basically
the more like contract-oriented, um, exchange of goods and services, products, labor, etc.
okay. I just basically I just don't see how organizing this company in a different fashion, like the issue that you have with the company of people being susceptible to sensationalist headlines, of people publishing
Well,
false
that's
or
fine.
misleading information, like this seems to be like part of the human condition and not intrinsic or baked into any sort of like economic system. I just don't see how having more oversight.
I agree with you that it's not baked into any specific economic system, but what we have in the form of headlines and all of this at the moment represents a much smaller pool of power, a much smaller amount of people. If we did actually have it to where these things were democratically owned, I'm not saying that the outcome is automatically different, but potentially speaking, we are talking about a lot more people's interests. And if people are on autopilot, sure, I'm not going to dispute the idea that it's possible that misinformation can exist one way or the other. However, we do arrange it in a way, if we're talking about the kind of more justification-based hierarchies, or in theory, and I'd keep in mind, I very much say in theory here, an actual flat hierarchy that's maybe organized in a more web-oriented way, those types of things, you end up with a lot more input from a lot more people. Now, does that mean nobody can seize power? Does that mean nobody can be an ideologue or a demagogue or anything like that? No, I think that's not stuff that you can answer by changing the economic system.
Do you think that people in today's society, do you think people will generally converge on to like truthful or societally beneficial things?
I think societally beneficial, but I'm not a
How do you
I'm not a
explain,
person
like,
who
for
just,
instance, the existence of the Republican Party, if that was true?
well, I mean, there's a whole lot of financial interest that sort of drives a lot of the Republican Party. And I'm not just saying like that goes away or anything. However, the power structure as it is benefits more from the Republican Party and has benefited more from the Republican Party.
Wouldn't
Um,
somebody counter your argument and just say that you just want to create your own self-perpetuating power structure that will reinforce itself, though? Like if you had some planned economy or whatever, that would play
mhm.
into people necessarily having opinions that are positive about that? Like,
Well, see, that's the whole idea of a participatory system where people actually do have more, because we have a republic at the moment. We have a representative democracy, supposedly. Um, it's flawed,
well, to be
but
clear, hold on. Well, just to be clear, America does have
sure,
a
yeah,
representative democracy. As far as I know, our elections do have integrity. We do vote for our leaders. Everybody that's there is there because somebody voted for them. That's my understanding of it. But okay, go ahead.
well, yeah, but then if we start to bring in, gerrymandering and voter suppression and those types of things,
Hmm.
we do have flaws. It's not as though
For
it
sure.
is, yeah, and the way I see it is we have a lot of misinformation that is the only information presented. Like
Yep.
you have large amounts of money that is spent to ensure that certain information is withheld, certain information is presented,
Hmm.
and I sincerely doubt you have an argument against that. I don't think that we're probably on a different side as far as that goes.
No, but like this is
Um,
kind of the central point of my argument with Ben is I definitely see that there are some flaws related to the way that our society functions today. I just don't see
mhm.
how some theoretical socialist system would stop this. People still have their own interests that they're going to be representing and pushing to other people, unless you want to get into some pretty extreme positions of like banning all advertising or something. Like,
Well, I see. Here's the thing about that. If we ban advertising, then what we're basically doing is banning expression. Now, unfortunately, advertising is it's an expression of power. It's something that somebody with power has paid to put out there. So, I mean, you could say in theory, yes, we can ban that, but ultimately, there's going to be ways to get around that one way or the other. As long as we have free expression, I don't think we want to sacrifice that. So. No, I think that no, that's not really the route to take.
do you think that right
However,
now, today in the United States, do you think that people vote against their own interests sometimes?
oh, I certainly do, but I also think that that is the result of we're scapegoating, immigrants for so many things. We're
Hmm.
scapegoating various different races. We're scapegoating, you know, X
Okay, if you think that
economic
people
group.
are susceptible to all of these problems, why did you take so much issue with me saying that right now in the U.S. workers are dumb?
Oh well,
Because it seems like
because
you kind of
dumb
agree
is
with me.
different than uneducated.
Okay.
I guess like that's kind of the thing. Like when I say dumb, well, what that means is like you're inherently dumb, not like your situation provides um, context that ensures you can't see this thing or
Dude, this
withhold
kind of feels
some.
like the race realist argument. Like, do you really
Does
think?
it?
Well, yeah, like, do you think, or I don't know what level. I mean, I imagine I have no charitability on Twitter at this point, but like, when I say someone is dumb, do you think that did you really think I meant that someone is like intrinsically by virtue of their entity, like incapable of ever learning or becoming educated on some topic, that they're actually like defined as dumb, that these are like genome sequences that are like forever destroying their brains from working? Like,
No, but at the same time, like you don't have a context on Twitter, and therefore, when people are using words like dumb, it does imply a less charitable intent than uh, just the idea that there is power at play that is withholding or boosting certain information that changes the context that somebody maybe socially exists in.
okay.
It implies a certain viewpoint to say dumb rather than to say uneducated or ignorant. Like whether or not you 100% meant like they are biologically determinist, quote unquote dumb. It implies a leaning towards a less charitable prescription for why they don't have the information.
Yeah, I can see that on Twitter. I mean, I would say that if you're familiar with anything else I've ever said or done, obviously you'd know that I'd know
I'm
that there's
not
something else. But
terribly,
yeah,
to be
sure, I
honest,
can understand
so.
that. I'm not sure if I would have said. I wish I could rewind the clock, because I feel like if I would say like workers are uneducated, I feel like I would have gotten the exact same pushback, but people would have been complaining that like,
You
oh,
would.
so you
I
think?
will say you wouldn't get it from me.
Okay,
I absolutely would not push back if it had been educated. But dumb, it just implies a less charitable position, in
sure.
my opinion, anyway.
Okay. I don't. I guess I don't. I mean, I don't know. We can go like these are all very general arguments. I'm not under the
Sure,
impression, or
yeah.
I don't agree that like democratically running like every part of society would necessarily produce better outcomes for people in society. I don't know
Hmm.
if like the average person is capable of making like decisions that would lead to things being beneficial for everyone in society, because
Well,
they're
I
and
guess my question there is why not?
so I'm not going to say because people are dumb. I'm going to say because people are generally uneducated. But the reality of the situation is that like people, I think most people just want to work, go to work, and then come home, and then they either want to go and hang out with friends, or they want to spend time with their family, and then they want to go to sleep.
Sure.
They don't want to open YouTube or Twitter or go to Google Scholar and start reading like on the dangers of climate change. Like these are issues that just most people just don't care about. They just want to work their job, they just want to have fun, and they want to live their lives. I don't know if I would want to trust a person like that to decide like, hey, do you think we should raise the federal funds rate, or is quantitative easing not the best way forward for United States monetary policy? Like, I don't know if I'd want an average person voting that, or like, hey, like should we export part of our supply chain to Mexico so that we can sell more cars, or like I don't know if like an average person can make a good decision about that. This person is going to be susceptible to so much propaganda, depending on who has their ear.
Well, I guess that sort of provides an argument for me, the idea that we shouldn't be allowing the centralization of power with capital. I feel like the more you own, the more likely you are to be spreading that propaganda. And maybe if you have more personal affects rather than private property that you're running enterprise on, and you're not conglomerating and collecting capital, the likelihood of you being able to actually dictate the information that leads those people down X rabbit hole or Y path towards white supremacy or what have you. I feel like it's not necessarily a cure for that, but like it's much harder for when we all have closer to an equal amount of power for that to happen.
So this is just something that I can push back against like almost everything you said. So firstly, in
Sure.
terms of incentive, capital is just one incentive for trying
Hmm.
to convince somebody of something else, right? If I'm trying to convince a girl that we should go home and have sex, it's not because I'm like leveraging capital to do that or whatever. It's because there's something that I want and I have a
I would
personal
disagree
desire
with
for it.
that. You're actually leveraging social capital, and if you've
Okay, that's fine.
displayed sort of,
Yeah, if we
yeah.
want to say social capital, that's fine. Okay, well in that case, people in a democratically voted workplace are going to have managers and leaders, right? You have to. Just because
Sure.
you're in a democratic workplace doesn't mean that everybody is the same kind of employee, and people even get paid more
Correct.
depending on your organization. So you are going to have some sort of union leader, some sort of worker leader that's been voted on. That guy will have more social capital than other people, and he has all of the incentives to push the same type of either anti or pro whatever propaganda that he wants to based on what he thinks is right, the same way that a capital owner would as well.
Well, here's the other problem with that is if you are in a situation where it's an actual democracy, then that person's power is significantly more revocable than any person's power in the arrangement we have today.
Sure. But it still doesn't escape at all from the incentive structure that this person might have to push certain types of agendas.
Okay, well, here's the problem with the incentive structure, though. Like when we're starting to talk about, like, if we exist in this other system that doesn't have like an official market of any sort, it doesn't have the same price setting and value setting mechanism. Sorry. My question is, how does that incentive structure apply to this situation that is totally removed from that?
Wait, what do you mean? That was a lot of pronouns. Sorry. Can you explain?
Yeah, I apologize. So you talk about the incentive structure, the financial incentive structure. If we were talking about a contract-based, moneyless exchange of, anarcho-communism type situation, I fail to understand how all of these financial incentives translate over to that. And that's my question here.
It might not necessarily be a financial incentive since we've removed that form of capital. It could be other forms of social capital. Sure. So say, for instance, say you have a leader of the workers who's been voted on, and he's friends with somebody that works at another plant, and you're trying to decide who you should purchase, or I guess in your system barter for goods for, in order to create some product or whatever. Like maybe this guy that's been voted on the workers kind of pushes you off towards some other thing because he's friends with a guy that works there, or because he, I don't know, like there's like, I mean, like all of these things are ripe for abuse in a million different ways. I'm not saying that capitalism isn't, it absolutely is. I just don't like the idea of here's like a system that we have right now that to some degree works for sure, but I'm suggesting a purely, I don't want to say fantastical, but a highly removed from where we're currently at system, and I don't even know if
that's the whole thing. We want to be removed. That's the thing. I want to be removed from what is, I think, an inherently inequitable system. Like when we allow capital to continue to centralize its power, to continue to accumulate capital, there's more and more of the ability for them to roll back any progress that has been made by, let's say, progressives and social programs, or et cetera, like civil rights. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Isn't that kind of like, I mean, if we believe in some form of moral realism and we believe that we're working towards some morally perfect world, wouldn't most people say that?
I don't know. That's the thing.
No, that's not relevant. What I'm saying, but like, if we did believe that, wouldn't we say that we've been like making moral progress as a country, though? Like capital has been concentrated into the hands of fewer people. Capital is becoming more efficient. Yet gay people can get married. We have abortion for now. Black people were typically doing a little bit better. We don't have slaves. We have civil rights. Like we're treating trans people better.
But why do we have those things though? We've made markets for consumption based around those things. Like, a gay wedding is a wedding. A wedding is incredibly expensive, involves a lot of service workers, involves a lot of products. And, there's a reason why it's normalized, it's accepted. You can get invited to it. You don't think it's weird. And people 50 years ago did think it's weird. So, I mean, a market has been created for consumption in that. And it's not just because gay people, are equal, because they aren't equal in this society. They had to continually prove that they were okay.
Sure, which they've had to, but I mean, it's not like there have been like these egalitarian socialist societies in the past where all of these progressive issues have been brought to the forefront and everybody is treated equally, and all the gay people and all the Jewish people and everybody are all loved by the state as well, right? Like, it seems like this is more like
but you could argue there's never been a state like that, though.
Yeah, of course, but I mean, like, you just gave me unironically, you just gave me the Republican argument for ending racism. You just said, like, well, actually, there are financial incentives. Well, because I argue against people about the cake bakery. I argue we should have protected classes in the U.S. because there is financial incentive sometimes to discriminate against people. And you just tell me, well, actually, markets fix these problems because they give you new consumers, that's like the hardcore Republican argument for why capitalism fixes racism and shit.
Well, it's my opinion that, you find... And this is going to be the thing that I say that probably sounds the most quote-unquote centricity this entire time, but a lot of the arguments that Republicans will end up making end up having some kind of like concern that could be construed as real. but it never actually leads back to some sort of actual democratic thing that they're saying. It's always like kind of a smokescreen. And I'm sorry, I've sort of lost exactly what I was saying. But ultimately, I think that these are arguments that they're ultimately co-opted. Like the idea that markets solve that type of thing. I agree there should be protected classes, but I only think that there should be protected classes because there is a huge state. There's a huge state that basically picks and chooses what's okay, and I think that that is wrong. I think that capital functions in a similar way. I think that when you have this massive centralization of power, you have all of these people picking and choosing what is okay, and I think that that's ultimately the problem. And I think that markets exacerbate that problem rather than solve it, because I think that markets are a tool for centralizing that power. They're a tool for rooting out the most effective market tactic or mechanic. And I think that ultimately that doesn't necessarily mean best. That means most profitable or that type of a thing. And I guess that's where I'm going with that.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I feel like we could drill down on like any one of these issues, and
I'm perfectly fine with doing that. Like, I'm not. If you don't want to go on forever, I don't mind. I'm more than happy to talk with you more, and I appreciate you not being combative or anything.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not generally combative when I talk about. I'm not like screaming at people. Although
Yeah,
I will say, like,
I definitely appreciate that.
It's a little bit like. It's very strange to me, or maybe you can empathize a little bit. It's very frustrating for me that when I tweet something that I consider to be pretty factually correct and pretty on point, I get a lot of pushback right now from progressives that will relentlessly shit in my mouth for everything I say. And then generally when I bring on somebody to talk, it's like, well, I don't really disagree with anything you say. It's like, okay, well, it's very strange because on Twitter, and I think I've done this like 3 or 4 or 5 times now, where I've brought up something, like, okay, well, what exactly have I said that you disagree with? And it's like, well, actually, I don't disagree with anything. And then it's like, okay, well, that's interesting. Like, I don't know, that's just, but
well, okay, let me go ahead and say this. Like,
sure.
Twitter sucks ass.
I don't agree, though. I think it feels like political camps. It feels like people have their political tribes, and they shut their brain off, and they just kind of like participate. Yeah.
I wrote a book called Custom Reality in You. It's basically about more of a materialist analysis of what people like to call echo chambers in a lot of respects. And personally, it matters a lot to me that we sort of have these, like, it ultimately, I feel, comes back again to consumption and markets. Each of these groups, I believe, is kind of this little market where we've sussed out, this little thing that we can commodify and sort of present to people as if it's wonderful and amazing. And it's always one-dimensional. It's nothing. It's like a single issue or a single aspect of an issue, and it's presented as an image, and we have to take the most two-dimensional version of it, and we have to follow the thought leaders, so to speak. And that, in my opinion, is what brings us to the situation where, if I'm saying stuff that you agree with, I'm glad. That's awesome. And if I'm saying stuff that you don't agree with, I'm perfectly happy to talk to you about that kind of stuff. Okay. But in my opinion, like, Twitter is kind of, it separates into camps because you have a lot of different sort of consumption demographics, in my opinion. Consumer demographics, sorry. Mm-hmm. And they sort of have self segregated, in my opinion. And this is basically where I think that there is actually kind of this is my shit that I'm always talking about most of the time, more so than just like, hey, co-ops are the best thing. I criticize sort of capitalism as it exists in our social lives more so than anything else. And I don't know. I feel like this is a manifestation of capitalism, exactly what you're talking about. I sympathize very much. Like, I criticize the left fairly often because I tend to look at, certain aspects of things that are going on Twitter, and I say to myself, what are you really doing? You're kind of just being an asshole to this one specific individual. And I'm sorry I've begun to curse so much, but
no, it's okay.
That's okay. But that's, in my opinion, it's a manifestation of the sort of biggest fan or lifestyle marketing, or any of these various things, like this is my team, this is my my party, my this, my that, whatever. It's all been, sort of charted as a consumptive path. And I'm not necessarily criticizing the people who do it, because I feel like it's kind of the only rational outcome to what we've been presented in our lives. But it's just fundamentally unproductive. And I'm happy that we're actually able to talk here where we can have some sort of a civil version of this conversation. I completely sympathize with the idea that people are assholes to you on Twitter.
Okay. Well, I guess, then is there anything that we actually disagree with that we need to go over? Or
It may be, there may not be. I don't know. I'm perfectly happy to have long form conversations where I'll answer any kind of question that I can't guarantee, like I said, that I'll have an answer. I tend to stick in the more social areas of this stuff, but I sympathize. But at the same token, that's what I wanted really to get out of this, is just where you're coming from with the way that you sort of go at leftists on Twitter. I'm not saying that you don't believe anything that you say,
the place that I come from is usually I want people to have conversations that are rooted in reality. That's usually what I rev.
Yeah.
So when Bernie bros get on and say
viewpoint.
like all the polls are lying and Bernie is actually the most popular, or when people get on and they start making fantastical claims about capitalism, like when AOC doesn't understand what stock buybacks are, why they work, or when people say like, well, these policies, Americans love them and all the polling data says otherwise, like these are usually the things that I push back against. And usually if it runs counter to the progressive agenda, they get like really, really, really upset.
Well, there's some aspects of, I think, media representation of polling data that can be influenced. But, there is, if you actually go to the polls, there's a very specific set of numbers. And, I can't attest to exactly how you've personally represented them, but I have to imagine that a lot of people haven't actually, looked at it. And I'm not saying that's a leftist thing or like an MSNBC viewers thing or whatever. I think that a lot of people don't actually read data. But I have a feeling you don't disagree with that.
Yeah, I guess I don't necessarily disagree. I don't know. I've seen you tweet this as well. Whether or not you support Bernie Sanders, you should be extremely concerned with the clear data manipulation.
If you look at the actual data in that article, like there are several notices where for instance, in one of the polls, they actually changed the numbers to say that Joe Biden had 3 more points than he did, which, it could be a mistake. It could be an intentional misrepresentation. I don't know. But there are points where there is actually questionable media representation of the data.
Okay. I'm curious, do you think that Biden is legitimately ahead of Bernie in the polls right now? That more
Yes,
Democrats...
I definitely do. I absolutely do.
Okay.
Do I think that every single poll is represented properly? No, but I think that at this moment, Biden has a lot of name recognition. He's very heavily associated with Barack Obama, and Barack Obama is very heavily associated with the times before the worst times. And I guess that kind of, in my opinion, it's very specifically beneficial for him, to where if he doesn't do anything that's outright bad, it's going to take a lot more to sort of bring him down in the polls than I think that a lot of people think.
Do you think that Bernie doesn't have a lot of name recognition? Like, that he ran his own campaign for presidency for like 6 months.
Yeah. I think that he's got, if you look at the poll of like individual donors, for instance, Bernie Sanders just absolutely, look that one up. That one's pretty wild. He just has the most donors in the United States by far.
Yeah, I've seen the maps. They look similar to the ones that Trump supporters were posted to show that Trump had the most widespread support because it drew from a lot of rural communities that had very low amounts of population. It was a pretty misleading map to make it look... Well, but I'm kind of disagreeing with the way that this is framed. Like, Bernie has a lot of donors, sure, but the whole point of using a geographic map to try to graph like somebody's support is an incredibly misleading thing to do, because rural areas are... That's
fair.
Okay.
I guess that's not really what I'm saying, though. I'm not saying like he has more support. I'm saying he has more more recognition this time around than the previous time, I guess, is what my ultimate point is. And also, Donald Trump did win the election, to be fair.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't win by popular vote, and that's another like massive issue that I feel like there's not really an easy solution for. I mean, there is an easy solution, but it involves changing a lot of very intrinsic things about how that election is set up.
Okay.
And
So when you say, okay,
well, in order to
wait, okay, hold on. Listen, I love you so much. Okay, this is I do this so much, and it makes me want to commit suicide in a video game. Okay, so like, I have gotten so much pushback on Twitter lately from so many people that say my takes are extreme, my takes are shit, blah 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 blah. But every time, and I dealt with this exact same issue when I was debating the alt-right or conservatives constantly. People would say, Destiny, you use bad debate tactics, blah, blah, blah. I'd pull them on. I'd be like, what do I do that's so disingenuous? What do I do that's wrong? And then when they come on, they become the most cordial. Well, I didn't mean it, and blah, 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 and everything is fine, And now, so like, for instance, like you've tweeted at me and you've said that like I'm a conservative grifter, which is
I
pretty
did say
extreme.
Yeah,
that I run
I took the bait.
grift.
Like I said, I took the bait.
But I don't even think I was necessarily baiting. Like,
it felt like it. Like I said, context makes things bad. And I'm not going to say that like at the moment I didn't mean that, but we are talking about Twitter.
okay.
We are talking about a point where there's a lot of context removed, and when you see like somebody saying, what was the tweet that you said that I responded to that with?
I'm pretty sure it was the idea that I would debate Bernie bros or whatever about their progressive policies all day, but I ended up making them look worse than conservatives. And so far, that seems to have held true. When I bring on Bernie bros to debate about policy points, I'm hoping I've got a conversation with Michael Brooks scheduled in a couple days. I'm hoping this one goes a lot better. But
well, sure. Like I guess. My thought here, then, first off, let me just say sorry for calling you conservative, Griffin.
No, that's okay.
But, like, to be fair, like, on Twitter, there's a lot of context removed. And this is why I say Twitter is kind of a piece of shit hell site. I see, tweet. Whenever I see your tweets, it's usually because they've been passed around in, let's say,
Lefty
a leftist
circles.
area.
Yeah.
And they're recontextualized in that there's nothing else said. So to be fair, like what we end up having here is like, well, here's another thing where he's beating on leftists for no reason. And, I'm sorry for that. Like, clearly, like you've been having a very patient and open-minded conversation with me, and I appreciate that.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I understand. I'm trying to dial it back a little bit since apparently.
Oh no! You don't need to dial it back with me. I'll tend to, be a little bit better once I feel a little bit more comfortable here. Like I was a bit worried about like exactly what level of like discourse we'd be having here, and I feel like we're having a fairly open conversation. I'm not going to attack you later.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. All right. Well, I mean, are there any other specific things you want to go over or bring up, or?
No, I mean, if there's any other reason, I think that Michael Brooks will probably give you a good thing. I like Michael Brooks quite a bit. He's
him
a little
and
bit
Sam, I
more
respect
centered
him.
on. Yeah, I think you'll end up probably talking more about like South America and areas in the global South, because that stuff it's wild. I'm not very good at presenting that stuff. That's why I tend to stick in the areas I do where it's about social stuff. But ultimately, I think a lot of the attacks that you maybe get on Twitter are maybe because of context and who is passing your tweets around and how they're spreading around. Because I think it's when you're saying like the Bernie bros, like it ends up sounding a lot like a lot of people who just like immediately say, well, all leftists are Bernie bros. And I don't dislike Bernie Sanders. I think that Bernie Sanders, out of the crop that's there, should win. But I would say that Bernie Sanders is probably not the same kind of leftist that I am. I don't like doing the competitive thing because I don't want to sit here and tell you that like somebody who's managed to get a bunch of public support. I don't want to go, I'm more left. But I would say I'm probably not the same thing as Bernie Sanders. For me, he sort of represents an easy cudgel for people who are are not the same as Bernie Sanders. Like I said, I mean, there are people that are far more like against the actual system of capitalism than Bernie Sanders,
Mm-hmm.
and they automatically get grouped up in with Bernie Sanders, and thinking about it, that's probably what it looked like to me at the time.
Okay.
To be fair, but yeah, and also combined with the workers thing, the workers are dumb thing. That sort of, it's like, well, maybe we could talk about that in a different way, but
Sure.
I guess that's probably that's the image of destiny that I had.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, hey, I understand. I'll try to be less inflammatory on Twitter then.
Well,
Okay.
you don't have to on my account, but
Sure.
I will say, like, there's people who are open to having discussions. I don't know how incredible Twitter is going to really be for finding those people, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, I appreciate the conversation, my dude. Thanks for coming on
Yes.
and being
Yeah, I
cordial
mean,
and
anytime. I really appreciate it.
thanks a lot. I'll talk to you later.
All right, see you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so backing up, let's say that I get into a thing where, let's say that I'm very wealthy for whatever reason, and I go into cities and I